Welcome to the Franchise Podcast, the official podcast of franchising, led by the award-winning Madeline Zook. With over a decade of experience as a franchisor, franchisee, and supplier, Madeline is here to shatter the status quo and unveil the unfiltered truth about the franchise world. Each episode dives deep with the industry's top executives, exposing the raw secrets behind their victories, dissecting brutal challenges, and revealing game-changing strategies that drive franchise growth and maximize profits worldwide. Whether you're a battle-hardened franchise veteran or a daring newcomer, tune in to the Franchise Podcast, where we don't just discuss the future of franchising, we define it.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Franchise Podcast. I know it's been a little while since we have uploaded, but that said, today will be worth it. So we are re-recording a presentation that we had about 250 franchisors on, titled Why Your Digital Spend Isn't Working Like It Used to. I have, over the past quarter, been talking and analyzing a lot of data from a lot of different brands, big, small, all bunch of different industries, and trying to understand, and in my locations as well, because I'm a franchisee too, how come cost per leads are more expensive? Why isn't the ROI the same as it was last year? Or, it was dropping last year, but why hasn't it been the same since, we'll say, about 2023? So we're going to get into that today. If you are listening just on the audio, my plan is to explain this very articulately. If I'm not doing a very good job, you can always hop over to LinkedIn or the YouTube, and there will be the slide deck as well. If you are a member of your franchise group, which is that virtual online learning and community for franchisees and franchisors, it will be posted there as well. So without further ado, let's talk about why our dollars are not working like they used to. Over the next hour, my goal is to solve for, like I said, the plateau or declining revenue and the whole term of the marketing doesn't work. It's marketing's fault. It's always our fault. That gets old after a while. And it also gets old from the marketing side to always keep telling people, oh, spend more, or you're not doing enough local marketing. Go be the mayor of your town. Like, to me, that can't always be the answer. So we're going to solve for a little bit of that today. We're going to talk about, in this next hour, what does this economic timeline look like? What about the digital liability? What is our growth strategy? What's our talk track when we're talking to other franchisees or our corporate teams? And then what are the digital partners you're looking for to assist in times like this? So let's get into the economic timeline. It's funny because I was studying some numbers one night, and it kind of hit me like a ton of bricks when I was doing the roll-ups of year over year, month over month. And for those who know me, I'm pretty direct, from Boston, live in Philly. So if I swear, I apologize. But I was like, holy shit. This is so blatantly obvious as to why it's not working anymore. But nobody's talking about it. And I don't think it's because we're able to see it in the grand scheme of, let's say, 5 to 6 years. So if we lay it out for you, pre-COVID or pre-March 2020, franchisees and franchisors had a pretty balanced understanding of how marketing worked. We understood that you couldn't spend 100% of your time and investment in digital, and the same thing on the local side. I would say the balance was maybe 60-40 and leaning local, right? Maybe we were 50-50 or maybe 60-40 digital, but we were somewhere in that range. Now, when COVID hit in, early 2020, all the way through about, the end or mid 2022, spending stopped. The pandemic halted, all of our socio-economic, every type of landscape. I always say dolphins returned to Venice. Like, it reset the entire world. and people were afraid to interact. So the only thing we could do was to market digitally because 6 feet apart. Don't go out and shake hands and kiss babies. That's not safe, literally. So we got used to that, but also, spending was way pulled back. Now, come around, the end of 2022 through 2023, everyone became hermits. We were loving not having to interact. We're saving on travel costs. We're working remote. We have COVID checks, whatever it may be. We're starting to get back to normal life, but still by saying, hey, cancel those plans, baby, like stay at home. And people were responding by buying and booking online. Well, around almost the exact point of December 2023 into January 2024, we started to see that completely whiplash. And over the past, 12 months, almost whiplashed too far, where I say now people are over it. They're depressed. They want to get out. No masks. COVID, we're trying to put that in the past. And so now we're starting to see people say, digital, we're not listening to that anymore. I saw a post by Leanne Caruso from, Hello CMO, and she said, consumer confidence is at an all-time low. And it's true. People want to transact after they interact. So the reason that matters is because, like I said, in pre-COVID, we were, let's say, 60-40 local. And then during COVID, it was like 0-0, or if anything, 100% digital, 0% local. And then we leaned into that on both the buyer and marketer side in 2022, 2023. And we were 90% digital, 10% local, or if you're lucky, 95, 5. And then now buyers are like, I don't like that. And so what buyers want is more of that 60-40 back to normal life. Budgets have realigned, but franchisees and franchisors have not been able to keep up quick enough with that change in buyers and consumer confidence. And so we're still at, I would say, 90, 85, 80% digital, the rest being local. And there's a gap between that 80% and that 60% that's not being covered locally. Franchisees got used to not having to market locally. They are not prepared to cover the increased costs by not marketing locally now that our buying landscape has essentially transitioned back to what it was pre-COVID. So I'm not doing a great job of explaining this because it is a little bit complicated, but all of that to say, as franchisors, we were not able to keep up quick enough with how drastically the buying landscape changed and pushing people to local market. We got used to sitting pretty and being able to push money into digital and let it just net a great return. So when things started to shift, it wasn't, oh no, we need to make up for it. It was, well, maybe it's just this quarter. Maybe it's our, partners. Maybe it's just this franchisee. And that's not the truth because we're seeing it, nation and industry wide. So what do we have to do to fix that? Well, we need to understand that what was working in 2023 is not working in 2025, or at least as well. And what things were costing you in 2023 is not the same as they're costing you in 2025. It's more expensive. So on that, we now have to shift the mindset to how do we get back to coaching franchisees on appropriately marketing locally without, like I said, relying on go be the mayor of your community. How do we quantify that for them? How do we relate it to revenue? And how do we make sure that it's working complementary to the digital? Because do I think we're going to be back to 60-40 local digital? No. What I would love to see is if we were 70% digital, 30% local. But there are some drastic differences there. And the big piece of where franchisees are flailing is because they're not understanding that you either have to hustle or spend aggressively. Ideally, it's a mix of both. But for those that are assuming that they can just spend, the minimum and get the maximum, that's where the expectations are off. And we need to start coaching and understanding the metrics from this point now. Almost kind of like we need to reset what our franchise marketing benchmarks look like now, not from when we were springing back from COVID or pre-COVID. And we're going to talk about, what metrics to look at now that we've understood, hey, it's not just me. How do we solve for what is the complete buyer's landscape now? And I keep saying that, but I can't find a better word for it. So on top of that, in 2024, we also were combined with an election year, and franchise brands on average have reported about a 10% decline in sales. That's, Fran Dev and consumer. A lot of that is uncertainty, all of those things. But it's pretty standard. Every 4 years, we start to see about a decline because of the election. And then on top of that, you need to examine any trends that might indirectly impact your product or service. So Mary Thompson, who is the CEO of BNI and formerly the COO of Neighborly, was talking to me, and she said, what our team at Neighborly had understood was that the real estate trends directly affect our home services. So, if home sales are down, well, of course, a lot of renovations that happen pre and post sale of a home are also going to take a hit. So I want to keep in mind that, what are the greater trends because of interest rates, employment rates, whatever they may be, that might also be affecting your industry as a whole. And lastly on that, it's something that we're always going to fight is the franchisees not quite understanding the wheel of marketing. And the way I explain this is kind of line, fork, wheel. 20 years ago, we knew that we could send a direct mail out for a certain amount of money and get a certain amount of clients. And it was the easiest, cost per new client or ROI you could calculate because there wasn't as many marketing revenue or outlets to choose from. Then 10 years go by and it's more like a fork. You can spend a chunk and maybe there's 3-4 outlets, but ultimately you can still pretty much hold each channel accountable for how many new clients or patients or whatever you want to call them are going to come in. Well, now fast forward another 10 years and it's completely a wheel where one piece relies on the other piece, cogs in a wheel. And so on that, it's so easy for a franchisee to sit here and say, social media doesn't work for my brand, or yard signs don't work, or Google doesn't work. Well, what are we holding those avenues accountable for? And I learned this from Shanna, the CMO over at Goldfish, is, I don't want to hold, let's say for a home service brand, Meta accountable for bringing in a bunch of quality leads. That's not what it's good at. It's good at impressions and brand awareness and getting a lot of eyes on the ads. So that's what I want to hold it accountable for. For Google, it's not good at the brand awareness if we're talking PPC because it's based on, direct searches, but it's great at the high intent leads. So those are the things that we have to continuously explain to franchisees where we don't want to pull cogs out of the wheel because we just assume that they're not all delivering the same amount and same quality of lead evenly. It takes a customer about 12 to 15 impressions before they say their first yes to a brand. That could be a phone call to purchase, that could be a click on the ad, and those impressions have to come from somewhere because they're not Googling you 12 to 15 times. So that's kind of what we have to continuously explain of, we can start pulling channels away, but on that money should still go somewhere. And ideally, if they're not willing to do the higher level brand awareness plays or the local marketing, well, then we need to make sure we're at least funneling that into, the highest intent channels so that we're showing up the most because we're not doing the other things to get those impressions. And on that, a couple of stats to think about. At the end of 2024, I pulled some stats from Google, and from over 17,000 campaigns they had run over the past year, the average for consumer brands, the click-through rate was about 6.4%, a cost per click, $4.66, conversion rate, 6.96%, and cost per lead was $66.69. So year over year, from 2023 to 2024, the click-through rate increased for 70% of industries, which means, people are still going to, we'll call it Google, for that trusted next step in the buyer's process. They're still continuously going there, and it's growing. However, the cost per click increased for 86% of industries. Conversion rate decreased for 12 out of 23 industries, and cost per lead increased 25% for 19 out of 23 industries. All that to say is that the buyers are still digital, but they're more expensive to earn. And, lastly, and this will go a little bit more if you're looking along with the slide deck with me, but Google Ads in 2019, you had one link, you had one little green ad square that said, the URL, and you had 4 lines of text. The pixel height was about 90. Well, now every PPC has 6 links, a sponsored tag, 7 lines of text, the website name, the brand, the icon, and the pixel height has doubled to 180. So, we've increased the size of every PPC ad, and therefore less can show up, and it's much more competitive. The reason why they're able to do this is because it works so well. Google has the monopoly, and we have to pay to play. And there's nothing that we as a franchisor, an agency supplier, or a franchisee can do to change that. We just have to optimize, our spend for kind of the rules they set forth. So now, all in all, if you take anything away from that, is we need to shift from cost chasing to quality chasing. Because if we're expecting to get, cost per leads that are back in the 2023 era, we're just going to be chasing something that might not be feasible. I'd always love to continuously get a lower cost per lead, but that might not be the metric that we have to focus on. If your brand is within an average, that's probably where you're going to stay right now. There's not much that you can do outside of that. And that's with the expectation that your agency or whoever's running the campaigns has a pretty decent understanding and expertise of how they work. I would expect that you're not working with someone who this is their first rodeo. But in chasing the quality, they will in turn net us a lower total marketing spend because of the conversion rates. And we'll get into that on our next section. And I need to take a drink real quick, so give me 1 second. So in talking about digital liability, which was next up on the agenda, kind of what I got into before about the channel accountability, not receiving direct leads doesn't mean it's not working. And how do we hold each channel accountable for what it does best? And I always get a laugh out of this when I talk to, quite frankly, mostly franchisees, but franchisors too, is, when was the last time you hopped on Facebook and said, can't wait to buy something, can't wait to find chiropractic care, can't wait to find tinting for my company, can't wait to find power washing? Probably never. We get on Facebook to stalk what our exes are doing and check out the best, local group deals. We're not on there to navigate away and buy something. Now, that's not to say that people won't or that something can't catch our eye, but I also want to understand, what is the risk appetite for someone who has gone on Facebook to do something socially? Are they willing to navigate away and buy something that might have to do with the inside of their home, their car? What type of investment? Is it health? I would beg to say that it's probably lower cost services and products that there isn't a lot of risk associated with. They're certainly not buying cars, or I would say in droves. I'm not saying total, but in droves, or their homes, or, their in-home health. There's just too much risk associated with those things going wrong. Then you would want to put the trust in Facebook, and that is why they go to Google. So a good way to understand what channels are going to be best for you and your brand, and because you can't put money into everywhere, and honestly, most franchisees' budgets are not big enough now to even expand into 2 or 3 channels. Usually it's 1 or 2. So I call it the 1 to 5 ranking. And again, this will be a little bit easier if you're following along with the slide deck, but essentially what I want you to do is, if we laid out, let's say 3 different channels in front of us, and we said, we'll say 3 for now. We want to say, hey, pick the best one to put our funds into. Well, you want to rank them from 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, 5 being the best, on 3 categories: intent, awareness, and quality. So let's say Google, Meta, and your website. Well, but just bear with me here. Your website, which is the best? Obviously, I know you need a website, but just, again, bear with me here. So for Google, we're going to say, oh, that's the highest intent. I'm going to give it a 5. Well, awareness, it's going to get a 1. I'm talking about PPC. We're not showing up in banner ads. Like, it's just if someone searches our name, our competitor, our keywords. So I'm going to give it a 1. And then quality, I'm also going to give it a 5, because that is where that intent comes from. This is someone lower in their buyer's journey and ready to purchase. So then I'm going to add those up. 5, 5, and 1. 11. Now let's talk about Meta. Well, there's low intent. We just talked about that. I'm there to stalk my, ex-boyfriend, not to buy a product or service. High awareness, because there is a lot of impressions. So I'm going to give that a 5. And then quality, I'm going to give it a 1. Because again, if I do get leads through there, whether it be Messenger, portal, I guess if you're sending people to a landing page, it could be a little bit higher. But overall, they're relatively lower quality leads. So 5 plus 1 plus 1, 7. And then if I'm talking about the website, again, this is something they have to have as a baseline, but let's just pretend it was an added expenditure for this exercise. Well, if someone's typing in myproduct.com, that's pretty high intent, right? I'm going to give it a 5. Awareness, I'll give it a 2. It can be on a lot of things. It can QR codes, mailers. They've got some brand awareness around and lasting out there. I'll give it a 2. And then quality leads, again, I'm going to give it a 5. So if I add 5 plus 2 plus 5 up, that's 12. So now I've looked at Google, Meta, and website, and we're going, the website gets 12. That's where, my best leads and my biggest ROI is going to come from. Next is Google, and then next is Meta. And then hopefully that can assist in how you're prioritizing where your spend should go. And a complete opposite of this would be, you always have that franchisee that says, you're wrong, Maddie. I have to advertise on my local cafes, placemats, those paper placemats. And you're like, don't do it. And they're like, you don't know my area. Everyone goes here and everyone's going to see me. And again, you can ask, well, when was the last time you looked at one of those things and said, wow, I really need power washing while I'm waiting for my omelet? Like, no, I guess you could say maybe awareness, but, I would also argue that I wouldn't really want my logo somewhere where you're dropping jelly and you have a coffee stain, but I digress. If we take it through the 1 through 5 ranking, well, a placemat, again, low intent, so we're going to give that a 1. Awareness, we'll give it a 1. And then quality of the lead coming from that, likely 1. 1 plus 1 plus 1 is 3. And even if you were to say, give it a 2 here or a 2 there, it's probably like a 5 max, which is still aggressively under the 12 and 11 and a bit under the 7. So again, we can now show them, this should be in the lowest priority segment if there's extra cash left over. Okay, so growth strategy. How do we get into this? Everyone take a breather with me. I talk very fast, and I also need to take another drink. So, quick business school review. I don't have my MBA, but I know a lot of people that do. And so one of the simplest ways that Adam Contos, is the former CEO of Remax and is now the CEO or partner in Area 15 Venture, said, well, this is business in a box, is grow a business in a box, get more customers, sell more money per customer, and increase the customer frequency. And you're like, well, duh. But you have to remember that franchisees, regardless if you are a recurring service or not, are always net new. They're not thinking about conversion rates. They're not thinking about average ticket sizes. Those are always secondary to, well, I always need new customers. The reality is you always need new customers, but are you getting the most out of people who have already trusted and trusted you with, their money and have leaned in and bought into your service and company? Mostly no. So we want to take a targeted approach here. And in doing that, like I said, we need to understand the biggest levers we can pull so that we don't have to invest more. And this is something that my husband and I created called the Marketing Revenue Calculator. And it is the devil's calculator. And the reason I say that is because it does not take into account recurring revenue or lifetime value of a client, but it will show franchisees, hey, if you don't want to do anything local marketing and you're always going to just focus on net new, well, guess what? Based on your benchmarks, this is how much you can expect to spend per month in cash to hit these revenue goals. And the way it does it is it takes into account your digital, you could use your blended, but digital is the cleanest data usually, your cost per lead, your conversion rates, your average ticket size, and then your goal revenue. So for instance, in a home service where it has a 2-part conversion, meaning a lead calls in and they get an estimate and then, the estimate to a sale. So if we're looking at a cost per lead, and again, if you're looking at the calculator as I'm talking, it's a lot easier than trying to visualize it. But for those that have better visualization, kudos. So follow along. If everything stays the same and we're trying to drive $25,000 in net new revenue this month, well, the average job size is $100, and the average conversion from a lead calls in and we book them to an estimate, 68%. And of those estimates, 55% turn into a sale. Well, this is where the cost per lead makes a difference, because on those numbers, if my cost per lead is $100, well, based on those benchmarks, to make $25,000 net new, I would have to spend $66,845, to which that a business does not make, which means something's off here. Now, if I go and input $30 as that cost per lead, well, now to make $25,000 net new, I would have to spend $20,000 instead of, the $66,000. So now you're starting to understand all of the sudden, when is the cost per lead bust? Like, when did we bust? When can we knock it over? Because if every other of our benchmarks are this, when does our franchisee suddenly start losing money? Now, the second piece are those conversion rates. And to keep it simple, we will just condense it into one conversion rate. So lead comes in to a sale. So now if we say the cost per lead is 30, the average ticket size is 100, and the revenue we're looking to drive is 25,000. Well, if I have a franchisee who's converting at 22% of all of their leads into a sale, then to make 25,000 net new, I would have to spend 34,000. Again, not a business does that make. However, if the combined conversion rate is instead from 22, it's now 80. Well, now that franchisee has to spend 9,300 to make 25,000, and that's a lot more doable. And then lastly, we're going to look at ticket size. So if we assume that the cost per lead is 30 and the conversion rate is 68 and 55, because we're back to the two-part conversion, and now we say, look, the average ticket size is $75. Well, to make 25,000, they would have to spend 26,000. But if we up that ticket size to 175, well, now to make 25,000, they have to spend 11,000. So because based on these numbers, it spits out from a formula how many leads, estimates, and jobs you would need in total to hit that revenue goal, we can very clearly and precisely show franchisees that if they don't do any sort of local marketing, what are the absolute worst and best case scenarios for them to hit their revenue goals. And now we circle back to the first part of the presentation when I said, there's no in between of local marketing and spending. It's one or the other, ideally a balance. They're going to look at the numbers and say, I'm not spending that. And you can say, great, if you only want to spend $3,000 a month and we're telling you have to spend 10, then we need to find where that $7,000, what would be cash investment, how are we going to make up for that in your local efforts? So now we're starting to put the accountability back on them. And on that piece, when all of the sudden you're starting to move little, I know we use some pretty drastic changes here, but if we're starting to move little numbers around from maybe it's 110 cost per lead, can I get it to a 93? Well, our lead to estimate conversion rate is 68. Can I get that to a 69? And our estimate to sales 42, I need that to be at least 44, and my job size is 100. Can I get it at 110? That's not asking customers to pay for that much more, right? Maybe that's an upsell. Maybe that's an increase in hourly, whatever it is, because those little tweaks are saving thousands from your upfront cash spend. And if anybody wants this calculator, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn or an email, mzook@francareers.com. I'm happy to send you the spreadsheet so you can input numbers. It's been very helpful in expectation and accountability setting. Franchise industry, I know it's not an industry, we call it an industry wide. So again, on all of those pieces, if you take away anything from that, what I would like you guys to do is remember that we need to find the lowest cost per lead, but with the highest conversion rate. So just because Meta might have a $13 cost per lead, is its conversion rate higher than Google? Probably not, right? So that's what we're looking for. And we need to mitigate the marketing accountability in terms of it doesn't work, it's not working, it's your fault. Well, let's talk about conversion rates, because at some point, it doesn't matter how many leads I get you if you're not going to close them. And where does ops come into that conversation? And then, targeting the most qualified customers. Again, we're talking about impression shares and cost per leads. It can get really heavy and really complex and busy, but remembering that, is TikTok the best place to get power washing customers? Probably not. I understand that people like power washing porn, the satisfying before and afters, but are people converting from that? Are they going to continuously convert from that? No, I need to target, higher income, net worth homeowners, individuals, etc. So that's where we're starting to take into account lifetime value, annual value, And we will go into that in another podcast because we don't have enough time for that. So, again, this kind of goes into one of the slides before when we were talking about, the scale of 1 to 5, how are we ranking these channels? Overall, what I can tell you is that people who are going to Google are late in their buyer's journey. And so you need to max out that impression share. And what that means is there's a minimum budget you need to spend to make sure you're showing up at least half of the searches that go out. You're not going to show up for 100% unless your budget is tens of thousands of dollars or thousands of dollars. So, for instance, I would say a good benchmark is around $200 to $2,500. In most regions, for a service or product, that is going to get you an impression share of about 4 or 5, which means you're showing up 4 or 5 times out of every 10 searches. That's enough volume to get you a pretty decent cost per lead and click-through rate, enough to get you in front of high-intent buyers. If it's anything less than that, well, now you're risking showing up between 1 or 0 and 3 times, and that's actually going to have a diminishing effect on your ad spend because you're not showing up enough. So the ones that you do show up on are likely going to cost more, and then you might not hit your budget. And so it essentially starts getting you a little bit risky into that wasted ad spend category. Now, anything above the 2,500, now you're saying, I actually want to show up 6, 7, 8 times. And oftentimes I say, hey, if you're hitting your budget, don't worry about marketing other places because you need to max out as the market for people who are actively searching for you. Before I go and try to invest more to convince people about my brand or convince people they need my services or product, I might as well shoot fish in a barrel first. So that's why I always say, it doesn't need to be complex. It might just be that you have a very, good budget in a competitive market and you're winning those customers. Don't worry about exploring if you're seeing a reasonable conversion rate and cost per lead. Now, outside of that, Meta, early in their buyer's journey, our goal is to get a lot of impressions and then drive the volume to Google. For CTV, same thing. Early in the buyer's journey, drive them to Google through a QR code or a phone number, whatever it may be. But our goal is to drive them to search or direct to the brand. For direct mail, early or mid buyer's journey, we're looking to drive direct traffic. That's when the phone calls come in. That's where the landing pages come in and the QR codes. And then again, any sort of local marketing, early to mid in the buyer's journey, we're driving direct traffic. Van advertising, which we call vanvertising or parketing, the local home shows, the BNI, we're driving people direct to call us and that's where that kind of devil's calculator comes back in, is because the more local marketing we have, the more direct volume or direct to brand volume we're getting. And so we're not paying for those people to click on our ads because they're calling in directly or submitting directly from the site. Whereas on Meta and CTV, we would be sending them to Google because they're already digitally likely going to take a next step digitally as well. So on that, now that we understand, high intent, where should it go? How much should we spend? A good example I have here is how do we now split that up if we know that we've got a franchisee that says, I'm not going to do local marketing, or I'm going to do the minimum, or I can't trust myself or my team to ensure and take accountability that I'm going to get XYZ done, but I'm cool spending as much money as this calculator you tell me to. Where do I do it? So I made an example here where if your cost per lead is $105 and you've got a lead to estimate conversion rate of 85%, which is probably very good. I wouldn't say standard. I think it's pretty high, but if we're talking like call centers, first point of contact, 85 is really good. I have no problem with that. I would actually be a goal to hit that. We have a great call center that does it, so I'm starting to take it for granted. I got to remind myself not to. But lead to estimate conversion rate 85%, estimate to sale 51%, with an average job size of 550. Goal revenue 25,000, which means digital marketing spend I need $11,010 to hit that. So then I'm going to say, of those $11,010, where should it go? So PPC, LSA, i.e. Google, I'm going to throw $6,000 in it. That's a pretty healthy budget. And for most franchises, I'm like, whoa, that's really big. It's not. It's actually pretty standard. Franchisees typically run a pretty low budget if you're comparing, the Google analytics and stats across different industries and businesses. And then I'm going to say 2,000 is going to go to Meta to drive more volume to Google. I've got $1,000 in direct mail, 1,500 in local efforts, whether that be, home show or who knows what, they have to order yard signs for the jobs. And then, we know that canvassing or cold calling is actually doing really well, and that service is $1,000 a month. Now I'm totaling $11,500. That is my recommended. They can pick and choose where they think it should go, but I'm at least giving them a pretty solid structure of where marketing recommends that spend and where it should go. Now, a reminder on this is, as we're talking about budgets per franchisee, your plans should be recommended either per territory or multiplied for the number of territories they have. Or a radius marketing. So if I have a franchisee that owns 3 territories, but then is expecting 1 territory budgets to produce 3x, well, that's something that we missed the mark on, and the expectations were wrong. Same thing if I have a franchisee and they say, oh, I'm going to spend $6,000 a month in marketing and I've got 5 stores. Well, that's not enough. You're diluting your spend with too many people. So it's not going to have as big or as great an effect. So it really needs to be done per store or per truck or per territory, so that you're not putting what would be 2 or 3 separate franchisee budgets into one because that one person bought a whole bunch of the state. So making sure we're keeping tabs on, the quantity of people we're trying to reach and, that location penetration, if you will. So what's next on the talk track is that, franchisees are primarily interested in 2 key aspects concerning declining sales. Is it just me? And what's the plan? So, one of the best parts we say of franchising is you're in business for yourself, but not by yourself. But just because you're not by yourself doesn't make you feel any less alone. Business and entrepreneurship is hard. So being able to be transparent with your numbers, report on them, give them benchmarking, brand, regional, revenue group. Don't leave any stone unturned so that they can say, well, what works in Florida doesn't work in Massachusetts. Or, yeah, of course my benchmarks are worse than, the California franchisees who's been in for 20 years and has a $9 million budget. I've been open for 9 months, right? So brand-wide, revenue-wide, regional group-wide, just so that they can gut check and say, okay, can I erase this fear in knowing, am I just the one that's struggling, or am I just a nervous Nelly? Let's compare. And then giving them a plan. They need to be able to seek support to navigate their business channel challenges, but in a constructive way. So, this is where you want to take into account, how is our support system working? Do they have channels to talk to one another? Are we encouraging that? Is there, support tickets? Is there one-on-one coaching? What does that look like to ensure that we're consistently being proactive to circumvent any sort of big conversations around marketing's not working, but also reactive when a franchisee might start fearing that something's going on in their business? And again, there's so many outside factors that go into business ownership that we as a franchisor don't know of or don't have any control over. So having that proactive and reactive support model is important. Another call out I want to say is, there's no world in where being part of a franchise just nets you enough free leads to sustain and grow your business. I feel like it's important to communicate that often and early to franchisees because they think that joining a franchise means they're just going to get website leads with no effort and no cash. And it's a shocking statement to say and think, but I can see it. I can see where you're joining a network of a lot of franchise locations, and you think, hey, as soon as I turn this on, I'm part of this large nationwide or region-wide known brand. People are going to start walking in my doors. More often than not, I see that rather than, hey, I just opened my independent business that also happens to have a support structure. So reminding franchisees of that is good as well. Again, if we're going to take anything from this last segment, it's essential to communicate that achieving growth goals requires an investment. It's time or money. And going back to the first piece, I would love it to be 60-40 digital local or flip it. Realistically, we should be shooting probably for 80-20, or shooting for 70-30, falling in 80-20, but we simply can no longer be in that 90-10 range, which is aggressively where we are today. So, and as also a reminder, taking that targeted approach before we start saying the vendors don't or partners don't work, the franchisee is not good, the marketing team is not good, or the branded creative is bad. What do our cost per leads look like? Where are the conversion rate cracks? And how about our ticket size? Once you've made sure that all of those three things have fallen in line in your brand and across your industry, then you can start exploring other options to help optimize it or fix it. But my guess would be that it's not broken. We're just not looking at the right numbers or not putting the right accountability on with the marketing channels or the marketing as a whole. And if you're saying, well, how am I supposed to find out industry-wide? Pick up the phone and call. The franchise industry is so welcoming and helpful that even if you were to pick up and call a competitor and say, hey, I need help as a franchisor, I'm trying to understand this. Does this data sound like right to you? There's always going to be someone that's willing to help, myself included. So, for our franchise community, that is, you can always ask for help. And lastly, as I'm talking about this, a question that might come to mind and has come to mind is, well, why the hell has my agency not told me this yet? Why has nobody told me that what I'm spending is actually a third of what I should be spending? What's going on here? And the truth is that most franchisors are using supplier partners to help run their digital marketing campaigns. But we need to remember, have we set them up to succeed in the model in which we rely on them to be truthful with us? And what I mean by that is, remember that they need to win business. If an agency presented us with investment recommendations that were double or triple what you would expect or what their competitors showed, you'd likely assume they're not the right fit because you don't think that they can achieve the same success at a lower cost, right? So if all of a sudden, you've put them up against 4 other people and those 4 are all saying, yeah, here's what we can do with 2,000. And they say, actually, this is what it's actually 6,000. That's going to be a hard business to win and bid to win every single time. 2, they need to win owners. So if you have 2, 3 plus agencies all competing to win over your franchisees, well, they can't come in significantly higher. They'll never have enough volume to succeed. So again, it's just a smaller scale of winning that bid. They also have learned to respect leadership and the FDD. If they're bound by certain minimums, they need to focus on making the most of what we as a franchisor recommend. That's the narrative. And if they start to go out of bounds beyond that, oftentimes the marketing teams can say, whoa, what are you doing? And what I've seen is that they're usually trying to make a mountain out of a molehill. I was working with an agency and a brand looking over things the other day, and I said, oh my God, you had to build 3 tiers of marketing, channels, campaign investments out of something that's not even enough to be one campaign. We're trying to split a penny here. We need to make sure that we're giving them enough investment to succeed, as same recommendations that we're giving to the franchisee. And then another piece is they just might not be the right partner. It's crucial to be clear about the benchmarks that they need to hit. I was kind of touting my one of the call centers that we use at Rolling Suds. I said they're phenomenal. My benchmarks for them are, I would love them to be between 65 and 72% of all leads converted to an estimate. If they go below 65%, we've got an issue. We need to talk about it, what's going on. They're at 85% right now. So, every time I'm communicating that with franchisees, we're not letting supplier partners dictate what is good and what is not. Of course, we're following the data, but we're also saying, hey, look, we're shooting for a cost per lead of $65. If you are aggressively brand wide above or below that, then we're going to take a look. Otherwise, I understand that is not where I need my team, myself, or my franchisees to focus. Let's focus on somewhere where the crack is. Where is the piece that's falling out of the benchmark range? And that's what we need to dig into. So, make sure that the data is readily available and that you and your partner, supplier partners, have the trust and transparency to share back and forth with one another. So now that I've talked your ear off for 51 minutes and 15 seconds, I would say we've provided some education and color behind, well, why is the ROI declining in digital spend? Why is the marketing not working, right? And as an overcap, the economic timeline, 2025 is not 2023, and it's certainly not, 2020 or previously. We've had layers of pandemics and, political pieces, as well as, interest rates. All of that is working right now against small business digital campaign numbers. And so we need to, like I said, make the most out of what we are working with now instead of trying to chase 2023 numbers. 2, marketing is a wheel. You need to ensure that every piece is pulling their own weight in order to net quality leads at the lowest cost. Keep each marketing channel accountable for what it is good for. Growth strategies. Keep it simple. Know your numbers. Max out your spend in the highest buying intent channels first. And rank them with your franchisees so that you don't get a lot of pushback. The talk track is, franchisees grow through time and or money, period. It's corporate's role to help find the right balance, not to assist them in not spending time or money. That is not what a franchise is, right? It's not a business in a box. And then digital partners, ensure you're working with the right people, benchmarking, audits, the community, franchise community itself. Set them up for success, which in turn will set yourself up for success, and then the franchisee overall. And just to kind of put a nice little bow on it is, what is success? To me, it's the franchisee and the franchisor having very clear understandings of who's accountable for what, our communication, and our expectations. And if all 3 of those are working together and in a nice balance, then success is going to come from both the ups and downs of business ownership, because we're trusted and we're utilizing the community and the foundation to work together in times that are tougher and, in times that are great. So to me, that is what success is, and I hope that you learned maybe a little something from this podcast. Again, feel free to reach out to me anytime on email or LinkedIn for any of these decks, or if you have any questions regarding benchmarking numbers. And, Adam Contos and I would love if you joined your franchise group. There are 2 forums, one for franchisees, one for franchisors. It's, few bucks a month. The whole point is to bring communities together digitally to connect, gain insights from one another, and have a home for all of these types of resources. Because I truly believe that, if one of us wins in franchising, all of us wins. So thanks a lot, and I'll catch you next time on the Franchise Podcast.
Thank you for tuning in to the Franchise Podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please remember to subscribe, review, and share.